The cluster of gram-positive cocci broke into a secret chamber to steal the famous Staff of Light, the ancient staff known to all as Staph Aureus. Their scheme was almost thwarted by the tall yellow man whose job was to protect the ancient staff, and they evaded his attack when all of a sudden they found a cat playing with his cube of jello. And they approached the cat. The cat warned them that the scalded skin man was on his way, and they must leave immediately. Just as the scalded skin man smashed his way into the room, besides his burning skin, they noticed that he was holding the end card and a large tampon with intense shocks. And he had a scepter in his knee, along with osteomyelitis. But they soon realized that the scalded skin man himself was powerless. He came to warn them that the man in the van was coming to finally put an end to these intruding creatures with his cold mice in his van.
Alright, so that was our crazy scene on Staphylococcus aureus, or Staph Aureus. Let's explain what everything represents. So Staph Aureus, of course, was represented by the radiant staph, since aureus means radiant or golden in Old Greek, and we'll explain soon why Staph Aureus is referred to as radiant. But first, let us explain Staphylococcus. Staph means a cluster, and coccus means berries or grapes, and it describes the shape of the bacteria. It's spherical. Cocci bacteria are spherical shaped, and that's why in our scene, the creatures had a spherical shape, and they stay together in a cluster. This is in contrast, for example, to Streptococcus, which forms chains. But anyway, why in our scene were the creatures purple? Well, Staph Aureus is gram-positive, meaning it retains the purple dye in gram staining due to their thick peptidoglycan wall. That's why in our videos where we see gram-positive bugs, the bacteria will have a purple color. This is in contrast to gram-negative bacteria such as E. coli, which will be red or pink, since they don't retain the dye in gram staining. Now, before we move on to the tall yellow man, which we saw in the scene, I just want to point out something that you may have noticed in our scene. One of our creatures had an A attached to his back, or to his wall, his cell wall. This A represents protein A, which is on the surface of Staph Aureus. And as you can see, protein A is attaching to IgG, and that's because protein A is responsible for attaching to IgG at the Fc region, an important point to remember for exams. Okay, now for the yellow man, or the man that is tall for mannitol. This reminds us that Staph Aureus ferments mannitol, and the reason why the man is yellow is because when Staph Aureus ferments mannitol, it turns the medium yellow, or radiant. Hence the name Staph Aureus, for as we mentioned, aureus means golden or radiant. Now by the way, you may have noticed the picture frame on the wall in the back, which I didn't mention in the video. This picture shows a betta fish, representing the fact that Staph Aureus is beta hemolytic. So betta fish for beta hemolytic. Okay, now let's move on to the cat with its jello. The cat represents catalase positive, and the jello represents coagulase positive. Staph Aureus is both catalase and coagulase positive. Next, we talk about diseases which Staph Aureus causes. Well, Staph Aureus causes tons of diseases, but important ones which we pointed out in this video include scalded skin syndrome, represented by the scalded skin man. This is a potentially lethal skin condition that primarily affects young children. But the truth is, Staph Aureus causes lots of skin conditions, such as impetigo and cellulitis. Next, we talked about endocarditis, and in IV drug users, this is seen in the tricuspid valve on the right side of the heart. That's why in our scene, we saw the IV syringe on the right side of the heart. Staph Aureus also causes toxic shock syndrome, seen especially in women who use tampons, but may also be seen in those who use nasal packing. So again, the shocks coming out of the tampon reminds us of toxic shock syndrome associated with tampon use. Staph Aureus also causes septic arthritis, represented by the scepter in this guy's knee over here, as well as osteomyelitis. Osteomyelitis is most commonly caused by Staph Aureus. Finally, the infected lungs, which again I didn't mention in the video, but we have the visual representation. These infected lungs represent pneumonia caused by Staph Aureus. Staph Aureus pneumonia is often superimposed on a previous viral infection. Now, the truth is Staph Aureus causes lots of other diseases, but this is enough for step 1, and we'll talk more about diseases caused by Staph Aureus in our step 2 edition. Alright, now let's move on to treatment. In our scene, we pointed out the van with cold mice in it. there was this guy in the van and he had his cold mice, which he finally used to chase away Staph aureus. So van with cold mice in it, or van mice in for vancomycin. Vancomycin is often used to treat Staph aureus infections. And that's because when we talk about Staph aureus, we're often referring to MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus, as Staph aureus has developed resistance in many places to the penicillins or the methicillins. So we use vancomycin. So vancomycin for MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. But just remember that if the Staph aureus is not methicillin-resistant, then we go for penicillins. Now, for MRSA, sometimes we actually prefer linezolid, which I didn't talk about in the video. Linezolid is a medication especially effective for Staph aureus pneumonia. But just remember, if there's something you want to add to the video, the visual representation, to help you remember something better, you can always add it. For example, on top of this van over here, you can imagine a linen lid, a lid made of linen for linezolid. And as a final point, which again I didn't put in the main video, is that topical mupirocin is often used to treat impetigo, a fact that sometimes shows up on exams. Alright, so that's it for our video on Staph aureus. I really hope you enjoyed. Take care.